After several long years, it is finally the time for the return of Fallen Ike. That is right, after Dual Leaf pretty much sent him to the Shadow Realm, Fallen Ike is back and in a big way. We're finally going to get his refined and I'm very excited. Now let's start by going over what Fallen Ike essentially does. He has Distant Counter in his weapon as well as an Omni Unity effect he actually introduced to the game, which essentially what that does is all of your penalties get doubled as a buff and it essentially turns all penalties into a bonus, right? And the crazy thing about Unities is that they can stack, which means that Fallen Ike can essentially become a massive stat ball. And that is what really allowed him to come back for a short period of time alongside Legendary Robin last year. The other thing he does have is Mayhem Ether, which is just an Ether with a 4 cooldown. It's not really much to talk about. Either way, let's jump into this tier list and talk about the effects that Fallen Ike really needs to stand up at the top of the meta, which would be hilarious if that does happen because there will be 2 Ikes there, but I definitely won't be complaining. Now, one of the big effects that I think we need to talk about, I think a lot of people are going to be kind of confused that this is going to be so low, but I think the first one we're going to talk about is DR Piercing. Now, DR Piercing is a very key effect for Omni tanks as they need to be able to secure kills. And I think for me, honestly though, it's going to go down in C tier. Now, this seems crazy, right? You need DR Piercing, but the thing is that Fallen Ike's best build 100% of the time is going to be Lagu's Friend 4. It's just by far the best B skill, especially with this type of Ike. And so having that already built into your B skill, if you have it in your weapon, it's just redundant. It doesn't really help you at all. And so I think having DR Piercing is just not a good sign for that weapon because it essentially makes it so that you are losing some of your weapon budget if you're running an optimal build, right? So that and DR Halving are actually going to both go down in C tier, which is a funny place to start off the tier list, but let's just, we just have to think at the optimal level, right? Now, the other thing we're going to talk about is a new effect that we've never seen in Fire Emblem Heroes before, but I think it would be insanely cool and would be such a perfect fit for Fallen Ike. And that is going to be Reverse Dominance. That's right, Reverse Dominance, not normal dominance. I'm going to put this up in S tier. What this essentially would be is currently the way Dominance works is that you get true damage based off the opponent's debuffs. So if they're all debuffed up, you get true damage for that, right? I want the opposite. I want Ike to get true damage based off all the debuffs he has on himself. So let's say he had -6 to all stats as a debuff, he could essentially get plus 24 true damage, which would be really powerful. But you know what would be more powerful? If he was panicked, and then those visible buffs become debuffs as well, and you get like 48 true damage per hit, which would just make Ike impossible to tank. He would hit so ridiculously hard. So I think that would be really cool and unique, and I think it really fits like the Fallen Ike theme and motive really well, though I don't really expect to see that, to be honest. The next effects we want to talk about is one that's already exists on Fallen Ike, but it really, it is his playstyle, which is Unity. Now, it seems weird because he already has Omni Unity in his preference weapon, but they could always add another Unity effect into his Refine. And the reason why this is so insanely powerful is because the way Unity stacking works is that you essentially would get, like, let's say there's a -6 on you, you get plus 12. Well, after that first buff, it already covers the penalty, so you have a +6, and then you get another 12 on top of that, so it's plus 18 to that stat. And so if you could keep stacking Unities, it gets really ridiculous really fast. And so the thing is if we could have another Unity effect built into Ike's weapon, that would be triple Unity just by having Fallen Ike. If you add in Legendary Robin, that's 4 times Unity. Like, Ike would just be the most insane stat ball in the entire game, and I'd be really down for that. Once again, I don't really expect to see this, but I think it'd be really cool. Now let's talk about another one, and I think this is like one of the most basic things everybody needs in your Refine, and that is bonus stats. Fire Emblem Heroes has just been going insane with the amount of stats that weapons give nowadays, and so older units definitely need as much help as they can get, as Dragon Flowers really don't cover enough stats. And while I think the Unity effect would be the coolest way for him to get those stats, just pure bonus stats would be nice as well. Like maybe something like 20% of his speed at start of combat could be really nice. So that would be a good effect just for him to have. I do expect him to have this, just how much of it is the real question, right? Now, speaking of true damage like we were earlier, I think true damage we're going to put up in S tier as well. True damage is just a really nice effect, and it allows you to secure kills much easier. So Ike having like something like speed-based true damage, anywhere from like 15 to 20% will be really solid. It could help him secure some kills, because once in a while, Ike can fail to miss kills, Fallen Ike. The Lagu's Friend 4 build definitely helps with that, but additional true damage would also be good as well. Now, another big effect that is really prominent in the tanking meta right now is Scow. I'm gonna put Scowl down in B tier, and the reason for that is very simple. Scowl itself is good, but it's really available everywhere now. Like, we have 2 different types of Veils who offer Scowl, and so having it in your weapon, I don't feel is as necessary, because like in something like Aether Offense, you can definitely just like sock it in a Veil, right, using the Mythic and Asher season, and then like maybe Fallen and Light season, and Ike will be completely fine. Other than that, he also has unpierceable DR through the Ike Emblem ring, and so if they do have a pre-charge special, he can kind of mitigate that to an extent as well. And if you're going for a godlike reflexes build, it's also there as well. So I just don't think Scowl's as important as it might seem, especially for this type of unit. Now, speaking of tanks, of course, one of the big prominent effects every tank has to have is damage reduction. I'm gonna put this down in C tier. Damage reduction really has fallen off quite a bit. Pierceable damage reduction, that is. It just doesn't really do all that much, as like every single prominent nuke in today's meta has ways to get around damage reduction, either that be piercing or halving or like AoE special charging. There's just ways to get around damage reduction a lot of times, and so I don't think it's that great of an effect. Now I'm gonna put Brave damage reduction into B tier, as this does help a little bit. A lot of times you only get DR against the first attack, which isn't great, but Brave DR really does allow Ike to have a way to get around things like capture balls or just the abundance of Brave weapons that are currently in the meta. Another form of DR that would really help Ike out is actually AoE damage reduction. Like I was saying earlier, AoEs have become a lot more prominent once again, as they are just really powerful, and there are ways to really get around like things like Emblem Ike, right? One of the, the most powerful Omni tank in the game right now. So having AoE damage reduction would be very nice, especially because Fallen Ike does typically have debuff stats, meaning that AoEs are better against him. Having AoE damage could be a nice effect. Now, there are other ways to get it, so I don't think it's as necessary as some of the effects you're going to see higher up, but it would be cool. But of course, if there's one type of damage reduction we really want to see on Ike, that is going to be flat DR. We're going to put that up in S+ tier, as that is one of the most important effects currently for Omni tanks to have. All the best Omni tanks in the game all have some form of flat DR, be like Altina in her special, Emblem Ike in his special, or like even like the 7 flat DR that like Male Legendary Corden just got. It's everywhere, so you need some type of flat DR, and the Laguz build will offer Fallen Ike some of that, but being able to get more will make him way more powerful. Now let's talk about something else that's really prominent in the Omni tank meta, and that's specials. Specials are a very big deal currently. You need to find ways to either like cycle your special or to like proc it at the proper time. And so one of the big effects, of course, we have to talk about is slaying. We're going to put slaying into S tier. Slaying is a very prominent skill and something you definitely need because it allows for cycling of specials. In this case, it would allow Fallen Ike to use like the godlike reflexes build very effectively, because essentially what this would do is put like godlike reflexes at 1 cooldown, and then Laguz Friend 4 with special jump it up right before the foe's first attack, meaning that he can cycle it very easily. Slaying is definitely good, and in a majority of situations, it's going to help you out, though there are other effects that could be better than slaying if Ike were to get them. Some other effects that also are important for specials are like things like tempo. I'm gonna put tempo down in B tier. Full tempo typically just takes up too much of the weapon budget, and so I don't really want to see that all that much. But I would definitely like to see like anti-guard. I think I'm gonna put that up in S. I think that's a very nice effect. It would allow Ike to make sure he can get his specials off and just make sure they keep getting cycled. So I think that's a nice effect to have. The thing is with anti-guard though, it's not necessary depending on what build you're running and what other effects he has. Now, obviously, this entire time, the effect I've been talking about is Special Jump itself. Special Jump is one of the most powerful effects in the game, as it essentially is like Special Acceleration on crack, right? It allows you to get around guard, it lets you just get to that big special exactly when you need it. That's why Laguz Friend 4 is so ridiculously powerful. So if Fallen Ike was able to have Special Jump in his weapon itself, and then you combine it with Laguz Friend 4, he could easily like instantly charge a 3 or 4 cooldown special. And why that's really important is because one, it opens up builds for stuff like godlike reflexes, but also it can allow him to actually use Mayhem Ether in a defensive way as well. Because essentially what this would do is you get -4 special cooldown before the foe's first attack, let's say, right? 2 from Laguz Friend 4, 2 from his weapon. That would allow him to have Mayhem Ether charged, and then you could put the Ike Emblem Ring on it, which would then give him unpierceable DR on that. He would immediately retaliate with it, and then he'd also heal and just like completely nuke the enemy. So I think this would be a really cool playstyle for Ike. It would essentially allow him to kind of like have that special spiral build that Legendary Ike had back in the day a little bit. So that would be really nice. I'm not exactly sure if they're going to do that, but I would be very much a fan. So it's one of the effects I would absolutely love to see on Fallen Ike. Finally, of course, if we're talking about specials, we can't not talk about Special Acceleration. Like I was saying, Special Acceleration is just kind of crap nowadays. It's not that great, so I'm going to put it down in C tier. It's definitely a good effect, but the thing is, it's so available on so many different units. Like, via support, or for infantry on like pledge skills, right? So Ike having that in his weapon really isn't a big deal, as he can get from a lot of different sources, and even then you much prefer having like slaying anti-guard as a combo, or just special jump, which is by far the best option. And the last effect we have to talk about when it comes to specials, of course, is guard itself. And guard is a very valuable effect for tanks to have. It definitely has lost a lot of value just because a lot of nukes nowadays have like anti-guard built into their weapon, which means it effectively does nothing. But when they don't, it's a very important effect, especially against opponents who have like brave attacks or who have like ways to accelerate their specials. Just being able to turn off that special is a big deal. So guard would be a nice effect to have, but definitely something I'm not looking for. The thing is, like, Ike doesn't really have easy ways to get guard in his build, but he does have like support options like Ashnard or like Mirabilis, so it's definitely available if he needs it. Another skill I definitely do not want to see on Ike is going to be no follow-up. We're going to put that down in C tier. No follow-up is just everywhere in the game. You have a million ways to get it, especially as infantry, and so Ike really doesn't want this on his weapon, as it takes a large portion of the budget of the weapon, so we definitely don't want to see it there, though it is an effect he wants to have, just from a support unit or from like, you know, a skill or something like that. Okay, let's talk about some other interesting effects I think I could get, and one of the ones that we haven't really seen before is self-debuffing. We're going to put this one up into A tier. So essentially right now, one of the problems that Fallen Ike has always had is that he doesn't have a way to reliably get debuffs. He essentially has to like rely on the enemy to debuff him, or to like have like a dark shrine hit him, or like a bright shrine hit him. And so because of that, when Legendary Robin came out, Legendary Robin kind of fixed that problem to an extent. The problem is that Legendary Robin only hits his 2 highest stats and doesn't hit all 4. So if Ike was able to have an effect where like at start of turn, inflict -6 to all stats on Fallen Ike, that would actually be insane, because it would allow him to trigger all of his unity effects at one time, and it's guaranteed, right? So I would really, really love that effect. I think it'd be really nice. It wouldn't necessarily like add to his overall power, because there are, you know, other debuffs that might just be more powerful from the enemy team, but it does make him much more consistent, which is very nice. Another effect that hasn't been seen in the game before that I think would be really cool for him to have is penalty stealing. Now this is a little bit different, right? We haven't seen this before, but like imagine odd recovery, but instead of like recovering all the penalties off your allies, you absorb them to yourself. How cool would that be? Like, let's say Ike is within 3 spaces of an ally and they have -6 attack and he just takes it for himself. He takes the like -7 speed from somebody else, right? And why this is so good is if you're a big Fallen Ike player like I am, one of the things you'll notice is that you have to build your team in such a way that Ike has the highest of every stat, because you want him to get hit by the chills and by the shrines and everything else. And it can be very annoying if you're using like a unit like Asker or Milla, who has really high defense or resistance, and because they will get hit by the debuffs instead of Ike, which means that his unity isn't in full effect. And so being able to steal penalties from his allies would be a really unique and cool effect. Once again, it doesn't necessarily like boost his power by an immense amount, but it makes him very consistent, which is something you definitely want in your units. The last effect we're going to talk about in A tier is a lull or dull effect. Lulls and dulls are just really, really, really good in today's meta. Buffs are kind of thrown around everywhere, and so being able to turn off those visible bonuses so you don't have to worry about anything like bonus doubler or just them getting like a ridiculous amount of stats makes it overall a very good effect. Let's talk about the 2 final effects that I think are really, really important, and one of them I think everybody's been just talking about, and is one of the most key effects you need as an Omni tank in the current meta. It's one of the effects that really makes Emblem Ike a standout unit and makes him so ridiculously powerful, and that is Null Counter Disrupt. Null Counter Disrupt is a must for Omni tanks right now, and one of the reasons why Emblem Ike is the top of the meta is because he has it built into his weapon, which means he doesn't have to run a NCD4 B skill, which is considerably weaker than Legu's Friend 4, or even some of the other tier 4 B options, right? So not having to run that is a massive boon. Like, it's an absolutely ridiculous boon. It also removes a major counter to Omni tanks. So having NCD in his weapon would be insanely impactful for Fallen Ike, and I would love to see that. Of course, the final effect we have to talk about, it's on every single Omni tank tier list, most of the nuke tier lists as well, is the Dual Phase Brave effect, right? Dual Phase Brave is just a ridiculously broken effect. It's possibly the most powerful effect we've ever seen in Fire Emblem Heroes, and for the most part, the best Omni tanks all have Dual Phase Brave effects. Emblem Ike really is like the outlier amongst that group of like units. Other than that, right, you have like Desert Altina, you have both the legendary male Leers. Being able to have a brave effect is really good, because the reason why is when you get hit, you'll only get hit once typically, and then you get hit back twice. And typically as an Omni tank, if you can't kill your opponent in 2 hits, you're kind of screwed. So What this essentially lets you do is like, you get hit, you kill them immediately before they get to hit you again, and it saves you a ton of damage, and it also lowers the amount of healing you need. It also gives you a ton more firepower, so when you're in player phase, you can secure kills easier. Overall, it's just a very powerful effect. I'm sure you're all aware of that. So if Ike were somehow to get a Brave effect, which I highly doubt he will, that would be insanely impactful and would definitely like skyrocket him up the tier list, in my opinion. Okay, and with that, that is going to be my Fallen Ike tier list. These are all the effects I really want to see, and you may have noticed that a lot of the effects towards the top of the tier list are all effects in Legoose Friend 4, so you kind of get the idea. I essentially would just love to see a speed-based Legoose Friend 4 as Fallen Ike's Refined. I think that would be absolutely insane. I would love it so much. Not that I'm really expecting that, though. Either way, I'd love to hear from you. What do you think of this tier list? What are some key effects you would like to see on Fallen Ike? And how excited are you to see Fallen Ike's Refined? I know I am just ridiculously excited. I cannot wait for that day. And make sure to check out that Refined video. It'll be coming out a couple hours after the update drops. And I'll be going in detail about Fallen Ike, as well as all of his best builds. And of course, all the other units getting refined as well. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. And as always, I thank all my members for their constant support. This has been Oblivion. I'll catch you all later with more Fire Emblem Heroes.